Thank you all for being here today on such short notice. This was not exactly expected, but thank you for coming. Nonetheless, we've received information today that the U.S. Attorney's Office will be doing something that they frankly do all the time, which is that they will be adopting a gun case and will be prosecuting it in federal court. This is also done all the time with drug cases because there is concurrent jurisdiction. It is routine, it is normal, it is legal, it is appropriate, there's nothing wrong with it. And frankly, in this case, where we do feel that there was a mistake made within the office, and we've been very clear about that at the beginning, let me be clear again, we feel that there was a mistake made in the handling of this case. We consider the federal indictment to be welcome. It's not our decision, and therefore we're not going to sit in judgment on it, but we think that there's nothing inappropriate about it, and it is welcome. That alone would not be a reason to ask any of you to be here. But what is much more concerning to us, and I do want to comment about, is that we think it is very inappropriate, frankly, to frighten people in Philadelphia with a bunch of false claims about what is happening in their community. And we think it's particularly inappropriate to attack the good people who work so hard in this office and stay up late and work weekends to handle cases properly and who handle those cases properly over and over and over again. Let me give you a little context. 93% of criminal prosecutions are done in state court. A sliver, 7%, are done in federal court. And the reality is that therefore you're going to have an office like the public, like the, you're going to have an office where you have 40,000 cases that are handled within a year. It requires an awful lot of effort on behalf of an awful lot of good people. And if we are to be transparent about our policies and our decisions, if we are to be scientific in what we are doing, then we have to do things like we have just done. It's called a report. We did a press conference not even a week ago in which we showed policies that we'd put in place a year prior. We did our own data, metrics, analysis, and we presented in detail the results of that analysis. It was accompanied by an independent report by academics, which came to certain conclusions, very favorable conclusions, about bail reform. That is called science. Let me tell you what is not called science. What is not called science is claiming that it's, quote, common sense, unquote, that if homicides go up, then they were caused by the district attorney, or they were caused by the district attorney's office. And what's even less scientific is to put up a prepared board showing the levels of homicides over the last 6 years, which shows that homicides went up for 5 consecutive years, and blame the district attorney's administration that's been in 1 year. That is what just happened. We have to have conversations around criminal justice that are based in fact, that are based in evidence and based in science. So let me give you a little science. In the year 2018, if you look at the Philadelphia Police Department's own statistics on reported crime, you will find that violent crime overall went down 5%. Down 5%. That is what the Philadelphia Police Department says in their own statistics. So why is Mr. McSwain saying that violent crime is running amok in Philadelphia? If you look at the statistics for just this year, and granted we're only into the end of February, but it still covers several weeks, let me give you a couple of examples. Rape, down 20%. Robbery with a gun, down 12%. Robbery, down 9%. Aggravated assault, down 4%. Violent crime overall this year so far in Philadelphia, including homicides and shootings, down 8%. Both years, crime is flat. Those are the facts. That is the science. Yes, of course, we have a problem with homicides. We have a problem with shootings. And the police commissioner and I are on the same page about the issue in relation to homicides. That issue, simply put, is the number of drug-related homicides in 2018 went from 60 to 120. We're in the middle of an opioid epidemic. We're in the middle of a crisis in this city. And that explanation makes sense. If you look at all the other motives for the other homicides that were investigated, the number of homicides remained about the same. What I'm telling you is fact. It is based on evidence. It is based on science. It is the truth. But so we are clear. I am not saying that this administration brought down violent crime 5% last year. I am not saying that this administration brought down violent crime 8% this year. That's ridiculous. That's foolish. It is just as foolish as saying that a particular administration caused violent crime to go up, or shootings to go up, or homicides to go up. The reality is that Mr. McSwain clearly wanted a moment in the limelight, and he wanted it for political reasons that we're going to find out about later. I can guarantee you that. So I hope, as everyone assesses what occurred today, that you understand two things. Number one, we have no issue with the legal move that was made today, which is routine, and frankly, which, as far as we're concerned, is appropriate. But we think it is highly inappropriate to frighten the good people who live in Philadelphia, where Mr. McSwain does not, with false notions about crime and safety. Thank you very much. Are there any questions?
I have a quick question just to clarify a few things. The
Yeah.
violent crime down, when you say that, is that arrest? Because you said it was from the BPD. I just want to make sure, is that arrest or charges? Like, I've heard that on both sides. I'm just trying to clarify what that means when you say 5% down.
It is reports. It's
But
reports.
Is it based on arrest or charges is what I'm asking.
Neither. It's based on reports. It's a report of the occurrence of a crime. So if someone says, I was robbed with a gun, but no one is ever arrested, it is counted as an unsolved robbery. Yeah. And those data, if
Is that
you
including the downgrades too? So if there's some reports I was robbed by a gun, they downgrade the charge, would that be included in that?
As far as I know, those numbers, which are kept by the Philadelphia Police Department, are based upon their assessment of what is the appropriate charge in the case. And that data for all of you, I don't mean to interrupt you, but that data for all of you is on the Philadelphia Police Department's website. If you go to their weekly reports or the annual report, you can find all of that.
U.S. Attorney McSwain described the philosophy of your office as anti-law enforcement, and he also said in this particular case that this is very rare that they would have completely separate federal charges from the local charges, and that in fact he had to get permission from Washington to do this because assuming this goes to trial federally, the sentence would not run concurrently but would be consecutive.
Well, okay, the permission process is routine. That's what they have to do all the time, and it is completely untrue that state court originated gun cases and drug cases are not routinely adopted, transferred, and taken. That's simply untrue. There are also quite a few cases where there's a conviction that occurs in the state court and then there's a subsequent federal prosecution. There is no double jeopardy implication, so I cannot agree with that. I mean, I will say this. Mr. McSwain's tenure at the U.S. Attorney's Office was only 3 years, pretty early in his career before he went on to do corporate work, where his clientele consisted of essentially people charged with white-collar crimes when he wasn't doing civil litigation for large corporations, so he may not be quite as familiar with what is routine.
Explain again what went wrong in this case. This whole press conference was basically surrounding this case. What went wrong?
So what went wrong within this office in this case is that we had a matter in which, at first, it was handled properly. The victim here was visited in the hospital by representatives of the DA's office who debriefed him and got the facts of the case. He also visited again with representatives of the DA's office at the time of the preliminary hearing. But what went wrong is that when the case was coming up in a smart room, which is a room where cases often resolve by way of plea, there was not consultation with the appropriate supervisor about the offer, and there also was not communication with the victim as there should have been. That was wrong. That should not have happened. It is ultimately my responsibility, which I have accepted from the beginning and I accept now.
What is your reaction to U.S. Attorney McSwain's characterization of his office as having an anti-law enforcement philosophy?
Well, I guess it depends on what you mean. In my view, we should be elevating the best police officers who do the best work and not making up excuses for police officers who are corrupt or brutal. In my world, we should have one standard for law enforcement and everybody else, which is that the law applies to all of them. To me, that is not anti-law enforcement, that is pro-law enforcement. That is elevating the best within the police department by getting the worst out of the way, and I am perfectly happy to express it that way.
Critics say that too often people cherry pick statistics. And McSwain's doing it in this case, and you're doing it with that report. What would you say to those critics?
Mr. McSwain is essentially not presenting any statistics. What he said is that it's common sense, that if homicides go up for the 5th consecutive year, it's all my fault. I mean, I suppose there's a statistic, maybe it's the number of homicides, but to me that's hardly a statistical analysis. I mean, that's just almost amusing.
Well, his argument is as you let more violent criminals out of the prisons, or you get reduced sentences, or you downgrade charges, and they serve less time in jail, those criminals are on the streets. That also attracts more criminals to those areas, and you're going to have more violent crime. That's his rationale.
Sure. So he can give me a report in which he can show me that any one of those things is true. He can show me that any policy of this office has caused a spike in crime, and if there's any policy that we have that needs to be modified, we'll go for it. We did that with our bail policy. We looked at all the people who had been released who would not have otherwise been released, and it was not only our determination, it was an independent academic determination that said no spike in crime, and they're going to court. I'd be delighted to see his report. Perhaps he could edify us, but we all know the truth. He doesn't have one, and that's why he said common sense. He didn't say science, he said sense.
But Larry, how much of this is your politics? He's a Republican U.S. attorney, you're a Democrat, he's been against you from the beginning. How much of this is politics? Is it, you guys have to work together for the betterment of the region, and it doesn't sound like you two are on the same page often.
Mr. Thompson, I think there are different philosophies in play here. I think that is entirely correct. How much of it is politics? All of it's politics. All of it. This was gratuitous and completely unnecessary. It's basically grandstanding. But it doesn't have much of an impact, because while Mr. McSwain was not at that office more than 3 years, I have over 25 years of interacting with people in that office. And so when I'm on the phone, which I frequently am, talking to someone at the U.S. Attorney's Office who says, hey, we have this drug prosecution, we'd like you guys to stand down because we'd like to take it over, I'm frequently talking to somebody I've known for 20 years. And I say, sure, we're happy to do that. Or when they call up and they say we have a case that we don't think we can finish up here having to do with XYZ, my answer, again, to somebody I've probably known for 10 or 15 years is, sure, we can work with you on that. And of course, there's a little push and pull here and there. I mean, that's typical. But I'm going to continue to work with the career professionals who are in that office who want to do the right thing, just as we want to do the right thing, and I'm not going to let Mr. McSwain's politics get in the way of that.
But your critics say there has been a spike in drug-related homicides, and they say you're soft on drug-related crimes. They say this so-called softness is leading to this spike in drug-related homicides. So there is a correlation there, they're saying, because of that.
I await their report. Please.
But you acknowledge there is, but do you acknowledge...
Please bring me your science. I'd love to see
Do
it.
you acknowledge there is a spike in drug-related homicides, a big spike? And you have the numbers. And
Not only do I acknowledge it, I think that the police commissioner and I identified it as being the one thing that stands out as we look at the increase that was experienced last year in homicides. The one thing that stands out is that jump from 60 to 120. It comes, as you know, as the 5th consecutive year of increase, when we've had an increasing epidemic related to opioids over all of those 5 years. It is a very serious issue for all of us to address. But if their point is that a policy of this administration has caused that, show it to me.
But they're saying these drug dealers know you're going to be a little softer, they believe, in terms of drug offenses. They're going to go to those corners. There's going to be more battles for those corners. There's going to be more, weapons being pulled on those corners. And that's why you have this spike in homicide, drug-related homicides.
Well, I mean, people can say anything. Here's the reality. Here's the reality. Let me answer your question. Here's the reality. When the federal government decided it was okay to increase the number of pills that are opioid by 400%, which is the policy of prior administrations, it is the policy, frankly, of this federal administration and this DEA, which has only screwed down on that supply a little bit. They set this in motion. I call on Bill McSwain to call on the President of the United States and the DEA to screw down on the supply of opioid pills, because if we don't do that, we're going to have more and more generations of people who are addicted. But that is not what they want to do, and they don't want to do it because they're very, very cozy and close friends with Big Pharma, and because that doesn't serve their political agenda.
The U.S. Attorney says that you are more of an advocate for criminals and criminal defendants than you are for victims. Do you agree with that?
So my office is the first in the history of the office to set up what we call the CURES program. This is a system of advocates for the families of homicide victims that has never existed before. We got over $1 million in grant money. We have 12 people all over the city who go in the middle of the night to the homes of people whose loved one has been killed. And they help those people through the process for 45 days in ways that have never been done before. I think that that shows not only we have a program called CARES, but I think it shows that we actually care. No, I don't agree with that at all. I think the reality is that Mr. McSwain is speaking from the bankrupt philosophy that the way that you care for a victim is simply to try to get tons of years or simply to try to get a death penalty. That is not what victims need. It is not necessarily what they want, and it does not make society whole and prevent crimes in the future. I think we care far more for victims than has been the philosophy he embraces.
So,
Larry,
Last question.
DA Krasner, I want to just check on something. I know this is very specific, but you mentioned that in Mr. Holmes' case that the DA's office had visited him in the hospital. He has said that that is not true, that the only time anyone visited him was when he was at the rehab, and he was visited by Danielle Nisbel, the victim service coordinator. And he did not testify at the preliminary hearing, so he didn't meet or speak with an ADA at that time. Can you clarify?
Are you suggesting McGee Rehab is not a hospital? Is that what you're saying?
Well, one time, it definitely would not be extensive, as you had said.
So I'm sorry, are you saying McGee Rehab is not a hospital? Is that what you're saying, Julie? I'm having trouble understanding your point. The
Hospital, I thought that you were referring to Penn Presbyterian.
Isn't the name of McGee?
So, I mean,
Look, here's the bottom line.
But it was still just one time.
Let me answer your question. The information I have from the file is that he was consulted twice, and that he was consulted twice in person. And once was in a hospital setting, and once was in another setting around the time of the preliminary hearing. That is the information that I have. If you want us to check further on it, I will be happy to do that.
So Larry, because there's this clash, after a year in office, what do you see as your vision of being a DA? Because obviously McSwain has a different vision of what the Philadelphia DA should be. What is your vision? For people that are hearing it, people that are watching it, what is Larry Krasner's vision?
So our vision is to try to do individual justice in each case, defining justice as it should be defined, which is not just about what happens to the victim. It is what happens to the victim. It is what happens to the witnesses. It is what happens to people who are completely unconnected from the case. And it's also what happens to the defendant, because that is what a real obligation to seek justice for everyone within the city of Philadelphia requires. I think the philosophy you are hearing from Mr. McSwain is quite different. It's really a philosophy that has its roots in retribution, vengeance, and too much time is not enough. And we have seen where that gets us. Where that gets us is to the most incarcerated country in the world, where our public schools are for sale because we cannot fund them. What we have seen is that that does not prevent crime, it causes crime. So I think that our philosophies are fundamentally different. He embraces the philosophy of the war on drugs, which has failed. He embraces a philosophy of mass incarceration, which has been disastrous, and we go a very different direction.
If I could just follow up on that. You say that you work well with the rank and file people in the U.S. Attorney's Office, folks that you've known for a long time. But if the head of the DA's office and the head of the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Pennsylvania don't see eye to eye, isn't that going to be difficult for the citizens of Philadelphia? I mean, don't you guys have to find some way personally to work together for the betterment of the citizens? Because, you know, if I was hearing this as a person, I'd be like, hey, those two don't like me.
You know, Mr. Thompson, I didn't actually call the U.S. Attorney's press conference today. And he didn't call me earlier to say, can we talk about this? This was done for reasons that are political. It was done for reasons having to do with his personal ambition. And the reality is that, just one second. May I finish? And the reality is that I have an obligation to try to make sure that things are done properly and that they're done fairly, and I cannot let him be a distraction.
But do you think it's important that you two have to work together in some way, person to person? I mean, that's what
I am happy to work with him. I am delighted to work with him. And I'm not going to let what he did today get in the way of that. But, you know, ultimately, I also have to use my time wisely. And if I can use my time wisely, making sure the cases are handled properly, that's where I'm going to focus.
Can I ask about the ethics violation?
You know, can you just give me 1 second? Did you have a question for me? I didn't want to.
Vince really asked that, but it was really about, you know, so many people see in DC the two sides fighting. That's all we see. That's what we saw yesterday at the Cohen testimony. How can you guys work together? Because people, I just think in general, this entire community, our entire country, our city, everybody's supposed to work together to get things done.
And I agree with that, and I think your point is a good one. But I also am mindful that when you deal with a bully, whether that bully is Donald Trump or whether that bully is the Republicans who refused to work with Barack Obama for 8 years, sometimes they're not interested in working together, and sometimes all that you can do is control your own behavior. My door is open. He is welcome to come visit. He's been here before. We've spoken before. I'm happy to talk to him about this. But really, I have a lot more faith in the people in his office who have been there for decades as opposed to him about being able to accomplish our mission together. But like I said, my door is open. He's more than welcome to come on down here and have whatever discussion he wants. I hope he'll bring a report. Hope he'll bring some science. I don't think he will, but I'd be happy to talk to him.
Okay, thanks, guys. We're gonna.
No, that's right. No, let it go.
No, I'm just.
No, go ahead.
Reaction to the ethics violation. Any reaction that you
Oh, is that what you want?
Yeah.
You know, Mr. Boner has already addressed it. It's obviously there was an error in reporting. Frankly, an error of reporting work that was done on for free by another entity, and we're not perfect. We're going to try to do better next time, and we've cooperated fully because we want to make sure that next time we'll get it right. Thank you.